I think a Gojo vs Sukuna anime movie is a massive mistake, and in this video, I'm gonna show you why. On May 21st, 2023, chapter 223 of Jujutsu Kaisen was officially released, and the world watched as the strongest sorcerer of the modern age made the first move against the strongest sorcerer in history. This one chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen would therefore mark the beginning of one of the most jaw-dropping, hype, and iconic fights in Shonen's history. I am, of course, talking about the global phenomenon that was Gojo vs Sukuna. Over 2 years ago, when this generational fight was releasing weekly, wow, it's been 2 years already? Like, what? It obviously had people desperate to witness Mappa's anime adaptation. And after 2 years of radio silence from Mappa, we are finally getting Season 3 of Jujutsu Kaisen starting January 2026. And even though Gojo vs Sukuna won't be in this season, yeah, sorry TikTok readers, but it's not happening. It does mean that once Season 3 comes to a close, Gojo vs Sukuna will become the next big event that Mappa animates. However, given the unbelievable success of Jujutsu Kaisen's anime so far, we might find that when the time comes for Gojo vs Sukuna to finally be animated, it may not be anything like what we expected 2 years ago. A lot has changed since 2023. The anime industry has experienced a global boom thanks to massive titles like Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, Demon Slayer, One Piece, and yes, even Chainsaw Man. Big studios like Ufotable, who make Demon Slayer, and Mappa, who make Chainsaw Man and Jujutsu Kaisen, have entered the movie industry because, well, just because the production committees realized box office money is a hell of a lot better than what they're used to. Before Demon Slayer and Chainsaw Man's respective movies released this year, I was pretty certain that Gojo vs Sukuna would not be made into a movie and that it was simply a fun fantasy the fans had. But after seeing the insane success of these titles in 2025, I did a full 180 and am now convinced it is much more likely to become a reality. After all, why wouldn't they turn one of, if not the, most popular and highly anticipated anime events of all time into a global box office money generator? I mean, Demon Slayer Infinity Castle pulled in a whopping $768 million globally and absolutely dominated the US box office, while Chainsaw Man has made nearly $150 million internationally since its release, making both of them two of Japan's highest grossing movies of all time. Despite what some deluded Demon Slayer fans think, Jujutsu Kaisen is one of the few shonen to ever rival and even sometimes surpass it in sales and popularity. It would not be crazy to say that a Gojo vs Sukuna movie would blitz its way to the $1 billion mark in no time. It would not be crazy to say that. Here is the catch though. Despite thinking there is a good chance that Gojo vs Sukuna will be adapted into a movie, as a viewer, I think this decision is a massive mistake. If you want it to be a movie, then great, I am not trying to convince you otherwise. I just want to share my personal reasoning for why I think Gojo vs Sukuna would be massively wasted as a movie. So what I'm going to do now is just explain my reason for thinking this, and then I'm also going to be bringing on a second opinion to give their thoughts on the matter, and also get into a little bit more detail about how the difference in animation quality would vary between a movie and a season. And then after that, we'll get into whether I actually think Toho Animation will make the decision to turn it into a movie, because I'm still a little bit on the fence about that, even though I do think it is overall more likely. Okay, keep in mind that movie revenue and performance are not the only factors worth considering when deciding if Gojo vs Sukuna should be made into a movie, at least not to the actual fans and viewers. The experience as a whole is what should matter to us, and despite not bearing as much weight as making a mountain of cash, the overall viewing experience and the quality of what they put out are still factors that production committees and studios should take into consideration when deciding on these things. I mean, they should, right? Like, I don't see any logical reason why they wouldn't. But then again, I guess the One Punch Man incident still happened despite defying all logic and reasoning. Whatever, let's just hope the industry learned their lesson from that little disaster. Let's take Demon Slayer for example. I personally was very excited for this movie because I love Demon Slayer's visuals and I love the Infinity Castle arc in the manga. But truthfully, I thought this movie kinda sucked as a movie. If it was released episodically, I know I would have loved it way more, but as a movie, that shit was not flowing. It felt like a compilation of episodes that completely ignored the beginning, middle, end structure that makes a movie a movie. Chainsaw Man's Resi arc, however, was the exact opposite, because when I watched Chainsaw Man Season 1, it was good, but I didn't have any burning desire to continue. However, I think I enjoyed that next arc as a movie way more than I would have if it was episodic, because it fit perfectly into a movie format, and by the end of the movie, I did feel like it was complete in its own right. Not to mention the fact it was an absolute masterpiece that is definitely Mappa's best work so far. At least I would think that if I didn't have insanely rose-tinted glasses for JJK and Attack on Titan. Actually, Allons, Mappa's adaptation of Attack on Titan sucked dick and the ending was ass. Shut up, bro. I just don't care, like, shut up. Now, this begs the question, would Gojo vs Sukuna even work as a movie? Would it even fit into that format? Well, I've heard some people think it would be absolutely perfect. You know, they think we could start with Gojo being unsealed, maybe get some anime-only extensions and additions to the build-up to the fight, and then see the entire fight start to finish before ending with the infamous and highly controversial Chapter 236. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? By the way, Chapter 236 is literally peak fiction. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. Yeah, no, I'm gonna be completely honest. This genuinely does sound perfect for a movie on paper, and it would be hella hype to see it all in one go in the theater. I do agree with this. But when you actually take the time to look a little deeper into it, you'll see that this would just be a massive waste. Now, don't get me wrong, okay? I do think it would work as a movie, and I'd definitely be first in line to go watch it with a fat smile on my face. By no means do I think it would be bad. I just think it would be wasted as a movie because Mappa wouldn't be able to draw out the full potential of this fight. The fact is, if Gojo vs Sukuna gets made into a movie, it will objectively lose one of the things that make the fight, and Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole, as hype and entertaining as it is. You see, one of the greatest strengths and weaknesses of JJK's final arc is that it was literally designed for week-by-week hype. That is something that JJK undeniably excelled at, and is probably a big part of the reason why the series became so stupidly popular, with people round the world tuning in for leaks no matter what time of day it was. Gojo vs Sukuna is the epitome of this. That fight was built on weekly cliffhangers which add so much tension. Even if you read it all in one go for the first time, the end of every chapter always had something crazy that made you need to keep reading. If Gojo vs Sukuna is made into a movie, sure, it will probably have marginally higher animation quality, but you would completely lose the weekly cliffhanger experience, like it would be gone. Think of it from the perspective of an anime-only viewer. Wouldn't you want to experience the insane weekly cliffhangers like Gojo calling Sukuna the challenger, Gojo losing the domain clash and getting his neck sliced, Mahoraga saving Sukuna from Infinite Void, Mahoraga saving Sukuna's ass again, Sukuna screaming for Mahoraga to save him as Gojo fires red, Gojo being declared the winner? Wait, damn, Gojo was like actually running that shit, by the way. Just take a second to think about all the peak and hype moments of this fight, and then decide if you really want to sit there and watch it all in one go, or if you would prefer stretching the experience out across multiple weeks and reliving the insane hype of that fight once again. Again, it is genuinely completely fine if you would prefer a movie, but I do low-key feel like everyone's patience is just kind of cooked these days. I can't really comprehend the idea that someone would want to go and watch it all in one go in the space of 2 hours instead of making the experience last. Just think back to when Season 2 was airing weekly. That was so fun. That's all that matters. It was just fun. You would watch the new episode either on your own or with your mates, and as soon as the episode ends, you would open your phone to see that somehow there were already TikTok edits of that episode with hundreds of thousands of likes. There were already people going back and forth on Twitter sharing their favorite moments, and there were already YouTube videos being made reviewing the episode. There was always weekly hype, and despite being disappointed when an episode ended, they were always such high quality that they would keep you satisfied just long enough for the next one to drop. And you get to do that over and over again for 24 consecutive weeks. And you're telling me you would rather go to the cinema to get the whole experience within the span of 2 hours and then see it get spoken about online for like maybe a month or two, if that, before the hype eventually just dies down. Because I'm not gonna lie, I had Demon Slayer and Chainsaw Man running my feed for about a month after their respective releases, and now I barely see anything, or at least I don't see anything that isn't just a recycled edit of the same shit. Now, if you were a weekly JJK reader, then chances are you saw how insanely fun and hype Gojo vs Sukuna was week by week when the manga was releasing, and that was only the manga. Think about Lobotomy Kaisen, Nah I'd Win, Sukuna clown images, Sukuna throwing a fire extinguisher at Gojo. That shit is still so funny, bro. I mean, that fight had people becoming full-on doctors with PhDs in neuroscience to figure out if Gojo would die from that next slice cliffhanger. Don't you want to be able to like relive an even greater and more hype version of that again? Because we're not going to get an event like Gojo vs Sukuna in anime manga for a very long time. This is genuinely the next best thing we have. Well, to be fair, I do because I actually missed Gojo vs Sukuna week by week. I wasn't reading at that point, so maybe I am a little biased, but I think my point very much still stands. Therefore, Gojo vs Sukuna will just be generational either way, but I want that experience to last, and as much as I will be desperate for more every single time an episode ends, I would much rather that than get it all shown to me in the span of 2 hours because I have no patience. And yes, before you all go down into the comments to start flaming me, I will just admit that part of the reason for me being in favor of it being episodic is because I am a content creator, and week by week content will simply perform better than if it all comes out in one go. But you know, a man's gotta eat, bruv. However, that is a tiny part of it. I genuinely love making content. It's done purely out of passion and love for this series. So if I can extend the fun that I have making Gojo vs Sukuna content, then I would of course rather have it that way. But when I sit here and say that I think the week by week experience would be unbelievably hype and fun, just like it was during the Shibuya incident, I am saying that purely as a fan of the series, not as a creator, because at the time of season 2, I wasn't even making content. Hell, I hadn't even read the manga yet. I was literally just a regular anime-only viewer, and I absolutely loved every single second of it. The weekly memes, TikToks, discussions with your mates after watching the latest episode. Oh, it was just so peak. I can only imagine how much better that experience will be for an event as unbelievably hype as Gojo vs Sukuna. And yet you guys still want to watch it all in one go. But at the same time, there is one key benefit to it being a movie that it would be unfair for me to ignore, and that is of course the boost to animation quality and production. But when it comes to animation talks, I'm no professional, so I have summoned Orion to give his thoughts on it. Don't get me wrong, he's no professional either, but he definitely knows more than me. Consider him a second opinion on the matter, listen to what he has to say, and then subscribe to him.
It pains me to say it, but Allons is right about pretty much everything regarding the movie versus TV adaptation dilemma. Movies on average tend to look much more polished than their TV counterparts. Budget doesn't really play a factor into the quality, it's more so the time aspect of it. Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1 had 24 episodes, which equals roughly 8 hours worth of content. Contrast that to JJK 0 at 1 hour and 45 minutes, and it's easy to see why 0 looked more polished all the way through. Animators simply had less scenes to work on, which means they could theoretically spend more time on their cuts, making it look all nice and pretty. I say theoretically because Zero's production schedule was also absolutely cooked. Hon on Twitter, one of the animators on Zero, shared that the teams had a production window of 4 months to make this movie. I imagine this is more so the raw time they were given for the animation and not everything including character designs, background art, voice acting, and other pre-production stuff. But still, 4 months for what is a pretty freaking good movie is incredible. So I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to a movie, but the chances of MAPPA being given unrealistic timeframes like this, well, they're not exactly zero. Personally though, I would not want this fight to be its own movie. One of the things that made this fight so enjoyable to me and pretty much everyone else at the time was the week-to-week journey, the memes that came out every new chapter, the endless discussions and power scaling, the bi-weekly Gojovers and numerous cliffhangers all came together to create a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me as far as reading manga is concerned. You just had to be there. Having this fight run weekly would 100% bring back that motion that the JJK community had at the time. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 6. Great segue, I know. Aired in batches on Netflix. And guess what? After a week or so, no one really talked about it up until the very next batch came out. Low online engagement, low amount of fan art being made. It was simply a major fuck up on Netflix's part, and I'm still salty to this day. Even if a Gojo vs Sukuna movie looked amazing and blew everyone away, it wouldn't really matter from a community standpoint if everyone stopped talking about it a week or two later. If it instead airs normally, every week would be like its own event that everyone in the fandom would tune into and then discuss after the episode comes out. This fight in raw chapter count is very similar to Yuji vs Mahito and Shibuya, and just look how well that fight was received and how many people continue to tune in week after week. By building up to the conclusion of the fight every week, you just end up with a much stronger finish than a movie that you watch once or twice. Imagine if the first episode of the fight ends with Gojo's neck being cut. When that happened in the manga, the internet went into a frenzy. And that was just the dedicated manga readers. The anime will have so many more anime-only people tuning in, it's just gonna be glorious. The biggest part of my enjoyment of JJK, outside of the great source material, has always been the incredibly active and passionate community. Making this fight a movie would lose out on a big chunk of what makes watching and reading JJK fun for me. To be honest, Allons told me to talk about both the pros and cons of it being a movie, but the more I think about it, the less I want it to be one. Sure, watching a feature-length fight between Gojo and Sukuna in the cinema will be, well, cinema, and I'm sure the actual quality of the animation would be out of this world, but I would happily take a quality hit, and let's be honest, it probably won't even be a big quality hit, for it to be a TV adaptation instead. Keep in mind that a lot of the animators working on JJK are huge fans themselves themselves, and they want to put everything into doing their show justice. That's something that the animation companies and committees exploit, but we won't get into that here. Gojo vs. Sukuna is the most anticipated fight in the series. Whether it's a movie or a TV adaptation, the animators will undoubtedly go plus ultra. My only hope is that they get a good enough schedule to give us the most incredible weekly experience possible. Back to this nonce, go subscribe to my channel instead. Unlike him, I'm not British.
Okay, so many people actually talk as if animation studios themselves, like Mappa or Ufotable, are the ones responsible for making production decisions like this one, and that most of the money generated by the anime goes to them, which is actually just not the case. Think of animation studios as contractors who are hired for a job, in the same way that I hire Josh to edit this video and then watch as he drains my bank account.
Well, that's too damn bad!
The production decisions lie with the production committee, which are usually made up of a group of different organizations. For example, Toho Animation and that demonic hellspawn company Shueisha primarily make up the companies that oversee the production and management of Jujutsu Kaisen. The decision to make an anime arc into a movie instead of a weekly season lies with that production committee. It is not Mappa's decision. The exception to this is when you have a situation like Chainsaw Man. You see, Chainsaw Man doesn't have a production committee in the same way that Jujutsu Kaisen does. Mappa actually acts as their own production committee and funds the project themselves, which means they also take a much bigger portion of the revenue Chainsaw Man generates than they would for their other projects like Jujutsu Kaisen or Hell's Paradise. Hell's Paradise is goated, by the way. I watched it recently. Oh, what a series. I can't wait for season 2. So just because Mappa witnessed firsthand how successful the anime movie industry can be with Chainsaw Man, the decision to make Jujutsu Kaisen into a movie still doesn't lie with them, regardless of how much they think it would be a good idea. It lies primarily with Toho. However, this doesn't mean that Toho and Shueisha are just sitting idly by watching as the anime movie industry booms. Just like any other business, Toho have likely recognized the potential and the benefit of making an already stupidly popular and highly anticipated event like Gojo vs. Sukuna into a movie. In fact, we know that they have, because the recent Shibuya X Culling Games movie was the biggest money grab I have ever laid eyes on. As a movie, that shit was genuinely terrible. I loved all the new content, but goddamn, they had to have only done that for money, bro. Like, there's no way. However, creating content episodically and then compiling it into a movie like they did with Hidden Inventory and this new Shibuya movie is not at all the same as animating an arc with the sole purpose of it being a movie for theatrical release instead of a seasonal thing. And to be completely honest, I feel like Toho would probably benefit more from getting the best of both worlds by releasing Gojo vs. Sukuna as weekly episodes in season 4 and then eventually compiling them into a movie that has a theatrical release later on, just like they did for Hidden Inventory. Take Chainsaw Man, for example, okay? The decision to make the Reze arc a movie seemed to stem from the surprising lack of Blu-ray and merchandise sales from season 1. When it comes to anime, money is primarily made from merch and Blu-ray sales, but when Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen are selling tens of thousands of Blu-rays, and even series like Spy Family are still hitting 10k sales, Chainsaw Man Season 1 didn't even make it to 2,000. That's like really bad. But you need to remember that Jujutsu Kaisen is not Chainsaw Man. The Blu-ray sales are the best in the game for that series. The merch sells non-stop, and overall it just makes a shit ton of money. The incentive to turn JJK into a movie is definitely not as strong as it was for Chainsaw Man, so it would be completely up to Toho Animation's own assessment of the situation. Therefore, it's still very likely to happen, but the decision doesn't lie with Mappa like some people believe, and there are definitely arguments for why it should and why it shouldn't. Well, I feel like Orion and I have said our bit, but I'm curious to know what you guys think, so let me know in the comments whether you want it to be a movie or not, and be honest, it's fine. Also, you know, feel free to defend me from the like 5 Demon Slayer fans that I probably pissed off by saying I wasn't a fan of their movie. Anime fans sometimes struggle with the concept of personal preference, which is why I made it very clear that this is just mine and Orion's own opinions on the matter. Whether it is a movie or episodic though, the only thing I am 100% certain of is that when Gojo vs. Sukuna does eventually come out, it will be absolute cinema. Perhaps the most absolute that any anime cinema has ever been. For now, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in a bit. I guess I should probably thank Orion for jumping on the vid. Oh, fine, if I must. Thanks, Orion. Make sure you guys subscribe. Nice. Maybe now he'll let my editor out of his basement.